Hi guys, it's vf.miniatures Warhammer Tactics series, and today we're gonna talk about the pale and gloomy brothers of the Raven Guard and how to max out their potential on the tabletop. So without further ado, let's start. And first things first, as the tradition requires, we're gonna talk about their strength. They are obviously Space Marines, so all the access to models, secondary stratagems, relics, etc. And it's already a very powerful start. What can we add to that with our supplement? The thing that the Raven Guard supplement provides is that it makes them the most mobile and alpha strike capable chapters out there. The level of mobility and swiftness that you get with a certain combination of traits and stratagems in this book is unmatched out of all the melee chapters and all the chapters for that matter. Their chapter tactic, unfortunately, is pretty bad. You don't really want to use it when you have access to being Raven Guard successors, and fortunately for us, the relics that you get in this book aren't essential for you. You can easily skip them and just go for the normal relics in the Space Marine Core Codex, or use the special issue war gear page in the supplement. So there is basically no downside to being a Raven Guard successor apart from not being able to use the normal chapter relics and not being able to use the only special character they have, Kevin Shrike. Even though he's a great character, he's definitely not worth the price of a bad chapter tactic for your whole army. It's a glowing example of what happens when you have the most powerful chapter tactic in all of the chapters in the 8th edition, and the developers make you pay for your sins by giving you one of the worst ones. Best options for the successor traits, I think, are the Stalwart, which makes you your whole army mini transhuman, so you cannot be wounded on 2s, which is very strong for your toughness for Space Marines, and sometimes it can even help your tougher units like Dreadnoughts or Bikers. The next two are pretty similar. It's the Born Heroes and the Whirlwind of Rage. I personally prefer the Whirlwind of Rage more because the first one, it gives you +1 to hit in melee when you have charged, and the Whirlwind of Rage gives you exploding 6s to hit, but it happens like the Shock Assault when you are charged, when you charge, or when you perform a heroic intervention, so basically all the time. And if you consider that statistically exploding 6s and +1 to hit are relatively the same thing, it's obviously better to choose the Whirlwind of Rage. And the last one that you can go for is the Hungry for Battle. It's a flat +1 to charge and advance for your whole army. Again, a very strong thing, especially considering that you have some great mobility bonuses in this army already. The super doctrine that they get is as powerful as it is situational, so you get +1 to hit and wound against characters in tactical doctrines, so turns 2 and 3. If you are planning to build a sniper heavy list, which I don't recommend, and we'll see why in the next section of the video, it will be an immensely helpful buff, but in many games where you're gonna face an army that is full of powerful HQs, characters, you'll be glad that you have this ability because it helps you both in melee and in shooting. Armies like Chaos Demons with a lot of Keepers of Secrets and Bellacore should be terrified of you, because when your claws start wounding them on 4s reroll, and when your Thunderhammers wound Keepers of Secrets and Bellacore on 2s, it's a bad day for them. And the last strength is their Umbromancy discipline is okay, but what I like about it is that it's not that important for you, so you can easily skip the Librarian and keep the slot open to be able to utilize the Abhor the Witch secondaries and prevent your opponent from utilizing the Wrath of Magnus for Thousand Suns, which needs you to have at least one Psyker in your army. So it's a win-win in both situations. But if you desperately want to have a Psyker in your army, I recommend to look at the Obscuration Discipline from the Phobos section of the Space Marines Codex, because it's almost the same as Umbromancy, and in many cases it's even better. Umbromancy has a couple of good powers, like Shadow Step, which teleports a character, and the Envelop in Darkness, which applies a -1 to hit modifier and prevents the target from overwatching, but all other powers are pretty mild, so the choice is up to you. I personally don't think that the Raven Guard requires a Psyker at all. Now let's talk about their weaknesses. The first one, and the biggest I think one, is that they are absolutely CP starved. The army operates unlike, say, White Scars, which have most of their powerful things built into their chapter tactic. This army's chapter tactic is an addition to the stuff that is in the stratagems and traits. And in order to operate, you need to spend those couple of command points before the game for the trait, use a couple of them before the battle starts. So starting the game with 5 or 6 will be the norm for you. And as most of the chapters do, they don't have a way to restore command points apart from the stupid Master of the Codex trait for the Chapter Master, which I despise because it's unreliable and costs too much for you. And the Mind Rate Psychic Power from the Obscuration Discipline, which is not bad, but it requires you to be within 18 inches of the Psyker and having a Psyker in your army, obviously, as well. Now, the sniper builds that I've mentioned previously. I don't like sniper builds in the current meta because the bodyguards are everywhere. So when you are going to bring a list with 3 units of 3 eliminators with bolt sniper rifles, a Phobos captain with a sniper rifle, a lieutenant with a sniper rifle relic, we're going to talk about it in the end section of the video, and when all of the characters of your opponent's army, the ones that you actually need to kill, stand behind the bodyguards and you can target them even though you have sniper weapons, it will be a bad day for you and it will be very frustrating. So at the moment, I don't recommend to run such lists. You are much better off using the Raven Guard in the way that I'm going to present to you in the next sections, the army composition and the Synergies 1. Next downside I see in this army is the lack of the unique secondaries, as the Salamanders and the White Scars, they all don't have the unique secondaries that the new supplements got. We need to wait until the Codex Space Marines 2.0 drops and the new supplements come out, or perhaps the new Codex Space Marines will already incorporate the new secondaries on a separate page, a couple of them for each of the chapters. But now the Oath of Moment must suffice. And the last part is not a weakness really, it's just a thing that I don't like about the rules in the supplement, is that their best playstyle, their strongest way of play is not very Raven Guard-esque. I think they should feel more like Space Marines Gene Stealers, so ambush markers, coming out from deep strike within 6 but not being able to charge, or within 8 and being able to charge, redeploying half of their army, crossfire markers, exposed position. All of these rules are very much on par with what the Raven Guard are supposed to be doing. They are supposed to be this fast hit and run force, not an army that can just throw 20 jump pack Space Marines right in your face on the first turn and be like, deal with me, bro. That's what we would expect from the Blood Angels or White Scars or Space Wolves, not the Raven Guard. They can be a melee-focused chapter, but they should feel more tactical, more covert, more stealthy. However, that's not what this supplement is at the moment, unfortunately. However, the stuff that we get in there is still extremely powerful, and we can certainly win a lot of games with that. Army composition. As always, I urge you to build a balanced army, because if you lean too heavily on shooting or combat, you'll probably end up with a very unstable list that will either be very strong against some armies and will fail miserably against others. That's not what we want. We want something that is stable and something that we can master and use in tournaments or in our simple games of 40k to win as often as possible. So what we need is to utilize the Alpha Strike component of the army whilst having some tough backbone to rely on to hold the middle of the board objectives while our forward operating units are bashing the enemy forces. If you've seen any of my videos, you probably know how much I love the Dreadnoughts for their versatility, and this army is not an exception. The 3 units of Contemptors with multi-melters are something that I would start my list with. They can provide some firepower support with multi-melters, they can fight when the time comes on the 3rd or 4th turn when they are near their opponent's deployment zone. or if your opponent comes to you in the middle of the board. But if you feel that you have enough of melee in your army, you can swap them for last fuse eliminators that I've talked about previously in one of my videos, or perhaps a drop pod filled with multi-melted devastators that can add to your alpha strike potential even more. Just remember that you need to have something in the middle of the board to cover your characters, to hold those middle of the board objectives. Something tough that can take a punch and probably fight in combat as well. Well, that's why I like the Dreadnoughts so much. They fill this role perfectly. And for our Alpha Strike components, we have our usual suspects here, the Thunderhammer and Stormshield Assault Terminators, and the Lightning Claw and Stormshield Vanguard Vets with jump packs. I'd probably have at least one full 10-man squad of Terminators and one full 10-man squad of Lightning Claw Vanguard Vets, because these guys, they do different things differently. The Terminators are tougher, but they are much slower, and they are better at dealing with very, very thick and chunky stuff. Tanks, dreadnoughts, heavy infantry of your opponent, and so on and so forth. Whereas the Vanguard Vets are more universal. This way, Lightning Claws, they do very well with almost anything in the game, and they are very fast. So having 50-50 of them in terms of points in your army is a good way to go, I think. If you are willing to run something more grotesque and less optimal, we have a choice of aggressors, because they are obviously also infantry, so most of the buffs that we're going to talk in the synergy sections will work on them. They have a benefit of being able to shoot a lot of bolter rounds at something before charging in, but you must be prepared to lose them quite quickly, because they don't have an invulnerable save like the Terminators, or the Vanguard Vets don't even have the 2-up save. The only thing protecting them is probably their toughness 5. If you really love your aggressors and you want to incorporate them in your list, Raven Guard aren't bad for that, because they mitigate the problem with the movement 5 of the aggressors. Next up are the Eradicators. As I've already mentioned in one of my videos about the Space Marines anti-tank options, I love Eradicators, but they have 3 big weaknesses. First is poor defense, next up is speed, and the last one is the range of their multi-melters. So any chapter that can put the Eradicators into Deep Strike or at least outflank should probably have at least one squad of them, because what you point them at is usually deleted. So having that in the Space Marines army when you already have a lot of good melee and speed and stuff like that is very important and useful. And thanks to one command point stratagem Strike from the Shadows, we can do that with our aggressors in the Raven Guard. I think that in terms of army composition, we don't need many characters. It's great to have only those characters that you actually really need, because it helps you with the assassinate missions, or rather helps your opponent not to achieve assassinate or not to take it against you, because having, for example, only 2 characters that I recommend here, a captain and an apothecary, it means that if your opponent wants to take assassinate against you, he will only be able to score 7 points out of the maximum 15. So librarians are optional, because the psychic powers that we have access to aren't essential. The chaplains are more useful than the librarians, but still are not necessary, not absolutely necessary, because we don't need to rely on the Canticle of Hate, because this army is very fast in and of itself. And the +1 to wound exhortation of rage is again very nice, but non-essential, because we have some ways like the lay low, the tyrants strat for 1 command point that allows us to have that same +1 to wound in melee against the targets that have 4 wounds or more and are not vehicles. So in this case, chaplains are something that you can go for if you have the real estate, but they are not absolutely necessary like in some other chapters. So a captain on a jump pack or a bike to be able to keep up with your fast units, and an apothecary to heal and revive. In terms of troops, I'll say here the same as I said with Blood Angels and all other chapters. If you can manage to build a list that can live with less command points but use more elite and hard-hitting units, you probably need to do that, because that's where Space Marines feel their best. But if for some reason you want to run a battalion or a patrol, Of course, the same choice as always, Assault Intercessors and Infiltrators, because these are our two best picks for troops. We also have a choice of MSU units of Company Veterans, or you can go for a unit of 3 or 4 if you have the points, and they can also double up as bodyguards for your characters if you need to put your character somewhere in the harm's way, but you don't want them to get shot. Now let's discuss the secondaries. As I already said, we only have access to the stuff in the core Space Marine Codex and the basic secondaries that everyone gets. Codex Warfare, poor choice. You are much better off using the Assassination or the Bring It Down secondaries that are in the same category. Next one. Battlefield Supremacy Shock Tactics Secondary. This one is better than Codex Warfare, but still you are probably better off using Stranglehold and Engage on all fronts. The requirement of controlling the objective that was previously controlled by your opponent, I think, is too hard to get for those 3 points that you can get, for example, in the Stranglehold secondary just by holding 3 secondaries and more than your opponent, something that you can control far more easily. And the last one is No Mercy No Respite category, the Oath of Moment that we all love and adore. The secondary is a good one because you need to do all the stuff that you were already doing. So like controlling the center of the board, you are probably already in the center of the board if you need to control the objectives that are there or somewhere nearby. Killing characters, vehicles and monsters. Almost any army in the game has at least some characters, vehicles and monsters, so getting that extra point is nice. And not falling back and not failing the morale tests is usually something that the Adeptus Astartes are good at as well. There are some good competitors to this secondary in the No Mercy No Respite category, like the No Prisoners, which was also buffed in the Chapter Proof 2022, and now it's easier to get those 10 or 11 points if you are up against an infantry or biker heavy army with a lot of wounds. All the while we stand we fight, this one directly depends on how you have built your list. If your 3 most expensive units are extremely tough and hard to kill, that's a good secondary for you as well. In terms of other categories like the Shadow Operations, we have our favorite R&D or Rund, as some people call it, the scanning of the quarters. It's also a nice secondary, but you need to have a lot of spare units that should be able to perform actions, and these should be units of at least 5 or 6 models if these are not troops. So this one is probably only reserved for Raven Guard forces that decided to go for a battalion detachment. Now my favorite part of each of these videos, the Synergies section. It's where the army takes its shape. Now, it's where we understand how exactly we're going to use it to dismantle our opponent's force. And we'll start with the most important part, the Master of Ambush Warlord trait that allows us to transport any infantry unit, so in this case a big 10-man unit with Thunderhammers and Storm Shields of Terminators, right to the deployment zone of our opponent. We must deploy them within 9 of any units and within 9 of the deployment zone itself. It happens at the start of the first battle round before the first turn begins, so you already know who's going first at this point in time, and it will make it easier for you to decide the position of the unit, if you need to hide them behind the obscuring terrain or perhaps put them right in front of the enemy because your turn is next. I think we all know how devastating can a 10-man unit of Thunderhammer and Storm Shield Terminators be when they are right in your grill from the first turn onwards, and there is no time to prepare, there's no time to put out your screens. You are locked in most cases to your deployment zone unless you have some units that can forward deploy, and this may be a good way to counter this tactic, but not all of the armies have those units. So in most cases this will be something that will take most of your opponent's time and effort to deal with, and it's not our entire army, of course. And we should definitely use this to our advantage, because whilst opponent is tied up with that big unit of Terminators, our other units are relatively safe because they, in most cases, will not have a choice whether to engage the Terminators or not. They need to deal with them. And it gives us some breathing space that we need to maneuver our other forces into position to wreak as much havoc as possible. When it comes to the bearer of this warlord trait, I think the best choice is the character that provides a significant buff to those Terminators whilst being relatively disposable, and the perfect guy for this is the Apothecary, because he gives them that all-important 6-up shrug that makes them even that much harder to deal with, especially when you consider healing D3 wounds on one of them and reviving another. It's especially important to have that 6-up shrug against the damage through weapons that would kill a Terminator outright if they fail the 4-up in one, but in this case it gives us a chance to save them. And if we lose him, it's no big deal, because he only costs 75 points and he isn't our warlord, so it's not that bad. And next is our actual warlord. I prefer the captain on bike because of the toughness 5 and extra wound, but you can go for the jump pack even though he's 15 points more expensive. No matter what you choose, you should have 2 warlord traits on your warlord using the Master of the Trifold Path stratagem. The first one is Rites of War. It gives OPSEC to our core units. We have a lot of infantry core and we want them to have OPSEC when they are near our warlord. And the second one is a very strong warlord trait, Swift and Deadly. It allows all characters and core units within 6 of the warlord to advance and charge. It's what gives our Vanguard vets some crazy maneuverability and a possible 30 inches of threat range. And now the cherry on top. You can use 1 command point stratagem Infiltrators. You can use it multiple times on multiple units of Vanguard vets to make a move with them before the game. You already know who's going first, so you can either hide them if your opponent is going first, or you can leave them in plain sight if it's your first turn. And after that, when your turn comes, they are already 12 inches into the no man's land. So it will be extremely easy for you to reach any part of the board with them after you move again with them 12 inches and then advance. Just be sure to stay within 6 inches of your captain, because he is what gives you the ability to advance and charge. Plus, you don't want him to get caught out of lookout, sir. Alternatively, we can advance and charge with any of our jump pack units and even have +1 to the charge roll with the 1 command point strike from the sky stratagem. I really like how all these strats are only 1 CP, as if they already knew that we would have problems with finding enough command points. So just imagine this first turn. You have moved up 2 of your Vanguard Vets units 12 inches forward. Then one of them is covered by your captain's Swift and Deadly warlord trait and can advance and charge after that, and the other uses Strike from the Sky's ability to advance and charge again with +1 to the charge roll. Whilst your Terminators are already within 9 inches of your opponent's deployment zone, and it's your movement phase now, so they can move further 5 inches. So they are probably somewhere within 7 or 6 inch range of some units that they can charge. It depends on how well you position them. So it's already 1,000 points of your army that are right at your opponent's doorstep, right in their deployment zone. I think it will be extremely hard for any army to try to deal with that quickly enough before they get obliterated. Oh, that's what Raven Guard can do. It's probably something that is absolutely unique and never happens in any other chapters. Even White Scars cannot do stuff like that. They are very fast, but they are not that fast. And there are also 2 stratagems that I really want you to know about. One command point for See But Remain Unseen. It's a -1 to hit modifier that you can apply to any unit that did not make any attacks in your turn. It's great if you have no way to hide your unit that is moving up the board, or if your opponent has a lot of out of line of sight shooting. And the next one is False Flight for 2 command points. You can fall back, then shoot and charge with any of your units. Again, very strong. It's always very strong to be able to fall back and shoot charge, but very expensive for an army that is so CP starved. So you'd probably use it only in desperate situations. Now let's finish up by discussing the relics. All of these relics are non-essential for your army. As I said in the beginning of the video, you don't need them to operate effectively with the Raven Guard, but some of these are nice to have. First is the Axe Tenebris. It's a way to make your lieutenant another sniper in your army if you are building your list this way. It has 36 inches of range, assault 3, strength 4, AP 2, damage 2, and also gives him +1 to hit, so you can advance and shoot hitting on 2s. And it also ignores cover, so great relic for the sniper lists where you want to put as many lookouts or ignoring shots into the army as possible, but absolutely non-essential for all other builds. Next is Armor of Shadows. It's like the armor of the Blade Champion of Custodies, 1, 2, 3 to hit always fails, and it also ignores AP 1. Nice armor, but I think if you were trying to protect your character, in most cases you are better off using Armor Indomitus instead, because having that 2-up save and extra wound and the ability to turn on the 3+ in 1 once per battle, I think is more powerful all in all. And of course the Raven Guard supplement cannot exist without a relic Lightning Claw. In this case these are Ebon Claws. They replace your dual Lightning Claws, so you can't take it unless you have both of your characters' hands with Lightning Claws. You get extra point of AP and damage D3, so pretty mild for a relic. We've seen relics that are much more potent in terms of their damage output, so this one is again absolutely non-essential if you want to build a cool captain that looks like their famous Primarch Corvus Corax. Next is Silenter's Pistol. Again, if you absolutely positively need all the sniper weapons you can bring to the table, it's a great sniper pistol, strength 5, AP 2, damage 2 with 2 shots, and again +1 to hit. It's nice for an apothecary because apothecaries usually don't have any relics and they have 3+ ballistic skill, so you'll be hitting on 2s, so there may be a nice synergy there. And the last is the cool combat knife, one of the few ways you can make the Phobos Captain and River Lieutenant be less bad in combat. Strength 5, AP 2, damage 1 or 3 against characters, not a bad stat line, and it also gives an extra attack like the combat knife usually does. So if you really want your captain or lieutenant to be better in combat, you should take a closer look at this knife. And now the roster example that I built following the scheme of play that I've told you about in the previous sections. First is the apothecary with the Master of Ambush Warlord trait. He will be transporting the Terminators up to the enemy's front door. 3-man company squad with the starter's chainsword and storm shields, and the sergeant has the lightning claw instead of the chainsword. I gave them storm shields because I wanted them to be more survivable, and in this configuration I'm pretty sure that this 3-man squad can take even more punch than a 5-man assault intercessor squad. Next to that, 4-up in 1 and 2-up save. HQ is the Chapter Master on bike. I had some points, that's why I've upgraded him to the Chapter Master. He has an Astartes Chainsword, which I've replaced with Teeth of Terror Relic. He has obviously the Rights of War and Swift and Deadly traits that we've discussed previously. 3 Contemptor Dreadnoughts with Multi-Meltas and Combi Bolters. 2 units of Vanguard Vets with Lightning Claws and Storm Shields, 1 unit of Terminators with Thunderhammers and Storm Shields, and a Teleport Homer for some endgame mobility, and a unit of 5 Eradicators in Deep Strike. So that's it guys, I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.